Good morning and welcome back to LoveBabz, Love Talk on Babz Rawls-Ivy. This is the second hour, and sometimes, we have guests in the second hour. I'm delighted to have and to welcome Nancy B. Alisberg. She's an attorney, a retired civil rights and disability rights lawyer with 40 years of experience, who currently serves on the boards of several disability rights organizations. And for almost 20 years, she served as the managing attorney and legal director of the now abolished Office of Protection and Advocacy for Persons with Disabilities and its successor, Disability Rights Connecticut. During her tenure at OPA, she represented individuals with disabilities whose lives were placed in jeopardy because of the biased attitudes of their caregivers, who believed that a life with a disability was not worth living. She also represented a class of individuals with disabilities who attempted to intervene in a lawsuit brought by medical professionals seeking a court ruling that the crimes of murder and manslaughter did not include killing people who asked to be killed. That case was dismissed by the judge. As a result of her experiences, she had second thoughts about her previous support of medically assisted suicide. Welcome, Nancy. Unmute yourself. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm well. Welcome, welcome. So I
Thank
went
you.
I went back and I listened to the conversation that Paul Bass had on his show with Representative Josh Elliott, and I listened to the part specifically around legislation being introduced for medically assisted suicide. And so he was on Josh Elliott, Representative Josh Elliott was on Dateline New Haven. And I guess it's an aid in dying legislation um, that they are working on with some, high-powered folks. I mean, State Senator Gary Winfield and some other folks who are invested in this matter. So where do you stand with this? Tell me. I know you're part of the progressives against medically supervised suicide. Is that accurate to say?
That is correct. And I think it's important to understand how I got to this point because, as you said in your introduction, I originally supported the concept.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in my work, aside from the class action, well, it started with the class action that I was involved with, where I started to get to know people with severe and profound disabilities who throughout their life had been told that their life wasn't valuable. So, for example, if an individual with a severe disability was hospitalized, they would frequently be asked by the providers in the hospital, well, you really don't want to continue this life, do you? And they had to advocate very strongly for themselves that, yes, in fact, my life is valuable. Yes, in fact, I live a great life. And yes, in fact, I want to survive. Um, and that was my first introduction to why the disability community stands so strongly against medically assisted suicide. And I also want to say, I think it's important to call it medically assisted suicide or physician assisted suicide as opposed to aid in dying, because let's call it what it is. It really is asking people to commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I then represented a young boy, a 14-year-old boy, who was in the custody of DCF. He developed a severe form of leukemia, but it was treatable. This young boy had a profound intellectual disability. And the hospital that was where he was hospitalized had gone to their ethics board, and they decided that because of his intellectual disability, he might not be able to understand why chemotherapy didn't make him feel so great and
Mm-hmm.
why he might have some side effects. And in fact, chemotherapy might even change and diminish some of his cognitive abilities. So they recommended that he not be treated for his leukemia.
They could do
They
that?
tried to do that. Luckily, my office got involved and we told them that that was a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that every life is valuable whether you have a disability or not. And they eventually decided that they would treat him. He went into remission. He recovered. He was then adopted and is going on and is living a great life.
Wow.
Right. Wow. I also represented an older woman who also had a profound intellectual disability. And one of the things that can happen with folks if they're not able to swallow well is they can get what's called aspiration pneumonias. And this woman had a history of aspiration pneumonias. And at some point, her guardian, who was her brother, decided that it wasn't worth treating the aspiration pneumonias anymore. So she was in a hospital with an aspiration pneumonia with an order to not feed, provide food or hydration or any treatment.
Mm.
We found out about this. I had to go to court and I got a probate court judge to order that she be treated. She survived this aspiration pneumonia, went to a group home where she lived a great life.
So Attorney Alisberg, I get the sense that there might be people who want to have medically assisted suicide, or do you think they don't know what they're asking for and they're being talked into it? And then I think, and then I see another track that people who are suffering, who have, I guess, terminal, incurable things, and they want some say in how their end of life is carried out. Like they would rather do it this way, that way, or, so I feel like there's a lot of variables in this thing. So when the Connecticut legislator is entertaining this aid in dying legislation, how should we look at this? What should we be thinking about?
Well, again, we should be thinking about how lives are valued. And yes, I totally understand that there are people who want to have control over how they die, and I respect that. The problem is that there are people who don't have the ability to communicate what their wishes are.
Mm.
I'll sneak in my third story about a client who I represented, who was a woman in her 40s. She had a successful heart transplant, but unfortunately, secondary to the heart transplant, had a stroke. And she lost the ability to talk, not the ability to communicate. She could write. Yet her guardians became her family, and they didn't feel that she should live not being able to speak. She would write me notes and say, I want to live. Yet her guardians, who did not value her life, issued orders that she not be provided with any kind of therapy that would protect her heart, the anti-rejection drugs. Again, I had to go to court, and the probate judge ordered that she receive this treatment because just because she couldn't speak didn't mean she couldn't communicate that she wanted to live. The problem is with a bill that the bills that keep getting presented to the legislature is it is impossible to know and to determine when somebody is actually terminally ill.
Mm.
So, for example, even though these bills say, well, if a doctor or two doctors determine that they have less than 6 months to live, that the physician-assisted suicide protocols can be enacted. Let's look at Jimmy Carter, who we all love, and sadly, he just lost his wife. Jimmy Carter has been in hospice since last February.
Mm-hmm.
And hospice is a service that is reserved for people who have 6 months to live. It's almost a year now. So it is fallacious to think that the medical establishment can say when somebody is about to die or when they're 6 months from dying. So it can hasten the death of people who, like Jimmy Carter, have an undetermined amount of time left to live.
But Attorney Alisberg, what if Jimmy Carter, President Carter, had a request that, you know what, I'd like to have a medically assisted suicide if it gets to be whatever, if I hit this threshold or whatever that is. And I don't think he has that. I'm just saying, what if he had that? And is he within his rights as a human being to make decisions about his end of care, his end of life care, and what that should look like? I'm just trying to understand. Like, it sounds like there could be some room here for some legislation that can support every avenue that we go down around this matter. I mean, is that something, as a lawyer, can you see that? Can you talk about that? Can you
Well, sure, I can
embrace
talk.
that?
I can talk about that. And the problem is when you have a statute and you're getting the state, by virtue of having passed a law, to embrace that we support the end of life. You're asking people to have to make determinations based on things that they cannot determine. If somebody wishes to end their own life, that is clearly their choice. But when you bring other people into the mix, like other doctors, who are then going to violate the Hippocratic Oath, which is first do no harm, but instead kill people, you have a problem. The other thing that we're particularly concerned about, and I'm very glad that you mentioned Representative Elliott's comments on the show, is that the bill that was not passed last year had what were considered by the proponents of the bill to be all kinds of safeguards. That the 6 months, you need 2 doctors, you need a medical professional, and you need a month of residence in the state, so the state doesn't become a
outpost for medical suicides.
Right, exactly. The problem is several things. First of all, those state residency requirements have been struck down uniformly by the courts. So, for example, Vermont, which is the closest state to us that has an assisted suicide bill, Vermont's residency requirement was struck down. And a woman from Connecticut just recently went to Vermont and committed suicide there under Vermont's law. And there are other states where the law has been struck down. Representative Elliott said in his comments that, quote, almost no one, unquote, would qualify under the restricted version of the law. And then he goes on to say, but passing it would open the door to evaluation and expansion. So the problem is, the way I see it, is that the law, the statute that they are proposing at this point has all of these restrictions. And they're talking about the restrictions when they advocate in favor of the law. And they do that because they want to get the bill passed. But their plan, from what I understand from what Representative Elliott says, is to go back and expand the bill. So the bill that we would be passing, if indeed it passed, and it hasn't passed in the numerous times it's come up, is not what the proponents of medically assisted suicide are really looking for. They're looking at this bill with its restrictions as to get one foot in the door. But then they want to get one toe in the door. Then they want to get the first foot in the door. Then they want to step through the door completely. So we don't know what they are actually looking for in terms of a bill. We have to look as an example at Canada. Canada has a bill, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what year it was passed, that originally had all of these restrictions and provisions. Year by year, the restrictions in Canada are being cut down. So now in Canada, you don't have to be dying within 6 months. If you claim that you have a mental illness, you can be eligible for what Canada calls medically assisted aid in dying or medically assisted suicide.
So that's at the heart of the fear, because my producer Harry Drills and I were just talking about that. And when he said about the Canada piece, I just didn't believe it. I was like, that just sounds too willy-nilly. Like, I'm depressed and so I can make the case to kill myself. No,
yes.
So I didn't believe it. I just was like, oh, I'm not believing that. But now that you said it, I was like,
it's absolutely true. They are talking about expanding the bill in Canada to children.
So Attorney Alisberg, is that the heart of the fear that the bill itself would become this unrecognizable march toward assisted suicide by anybody who walks in the door and says, you know what, whatever, instead of what it was intended to give people agency over their end of life care?
I think that's a very fair statement, but I think it's also 2 points that we have. One is exactly what you're saying. It's just going to become such a broad concept that anybody can go in. And we know of people in Canada who were homeless and couldn't get housing. And the provider said, well, you could use this MAID law if you can't find housing. But the other thing that we also remain very concerned about is the devaluation of people's lives. So it's a twofold concern. It's the expansion of the bill, and it's the devaluation of people's lives.
Well, Attorney Alisberg, well, wouldn't the religious folks push back on this and talk about the sanctity of life and and this whole idea of the nobility of suffering, right? Because that's very religious, right? That's very sort of whatever. But won't the religious people push back on that, since they are, invested in the sanctity of life?
Well, I can't speak for the religious people. Okay, I am not a religious person. As you know, the organization I belong to is Progressives Against Medically Assisted Suicide. So I really, I don't have much in common with the people on the religion side who are against the bill. And I don't believe there is such a thing as the nobility of suffering. I think what is important is that the medical establishment spend a lot more time and money looking at palliative care. We don't want people to suffer. That is not what we are saying by being against these bills. We want to see palliative care get a lot more attention, and that people get the kind of relief they need from pain. I don't believe anybody should have to suffer just because there is a religious religious calling to suffer. There is no such thing. But again,
so how do you push back, Attorney Alisberg? Like, does the Progressives Against Medical Assisted Suicide, do they call every legislator? Do they get in front of them? Do you give them examples? Do you cite cases? Do you look at precedents? Like, what do you do to get these people to sort of And do you get in the room with them and say, you know what? We might be for it if, or if you close this door, if you close this loop. Like is there some middle ground here?
I'm not sure we can say we might be for it if, because as I said, you look at Canada's example, and Canada's example is so terrifying. And since Representative Elliott has made it clear that this is just to open the door a little bit, and he's looking to expand it, that I don't think there is a we'd be for it if. But yes, we do everything that you said. We meet with legislators. We testify at legislative hearings. We speak to the press. We do shows like you're doing now. We want to help people understand that medically assisted suicide is not the answer to terminal illness. We're concerned that there might be an effort to use medically assisted suicide for chronic illnesses, for any kind of a chronic illness. Again, this is because we have seen the expansion of the concept in Canada and in other states, and because we have Representative Elliott here who has made it clear that he's looking for expansion. So I wouldn't say we'd be for it if. We want to help people understand why there are other ways, particularly with palliative care, to address the question of terminal illness, and that helping people kill themselves is not the way to go.
I mean, until you come today, I thought I was squarely rooted in, well, people can make decisions about how they want to have end of life care. But now I'm thinking, now that you introduced, people with disabilities and all these other things that I never considered, now I have to sort of think about this a little differently, because just because you have a disability or a challenge or some kind of physical challenge does not necessarily mean that you are not having a fruitful, productive life. I mean, we've come a long way. We've seen people with wheelchairs and all kinds of things that help them be integrated into society, into community. And I don't know if we think about those people ever wanting to commit suicide because they are, locked into a wheelchair, or they can't speak, or they can't. We've seen such great strides in allowing people to fully be part of society and community with tools and support. So this seems a little challenging to me to
and that's exactly right. That's exactly why I had second thoughts. There's another organization in Connecticut that works to prevent medically assisted suicide, and it's called Second Thoughts, because we realize that people can live full lives. And just to help understand that, when you talked about how people can be locked into a wheelchair, nobody's locked into a wheelchair. It's their method of ambulation. And that's how they get around. And it's a great way to get around when you can't get around a different way. So it's important. And that's why we do what we do, which is to talk to people like you. And again, as I said, I had to come to terms with this myself as well, as I got to know my clients and I got to see how people lived very fruitful lives. And that it's a real presumption for us who are fortunate to not have, at the moment, to not have a disability, because we're all only temporarily not disabled. As we age, all of us are going to have disabilities. And to realize that our idea of what a valuable life is needs to be looked at through lots of different lenses.
But then I can also hear and that folks who with the time spent with their medical providers, a doctor or somebody who says, well, you have this disease, and based on what we know of this disease, this is how this is going to go for you. We think, we believe, we have we could back it up with some science. I mean, no one really knows, but we
That's
kind of
right.
know, right? So
Well,
what about those people? I mean, well, listen, Paul Bass tells this compelling story about a very dear friend of his who went to hospice, had a brain tumor, was on death's door, and summoned folks like, you know what, this is the end. And then woke up one day, no more brain
yeah,
tumor,
yeah.
and went on to have a very productive life, a whole other kind of life. So that right there, I find kind of, if he would have made a different decision faster, then this could have changed. I mean, it would be a different story.
That's
But how do
right.
you know? But if people are confirmed, Attorney Alisberg, if people confirm that they want this kind of legislation, or they want the ability to make this kind of decision, how do we stand in the way of that?
Because people can decide to end their lives on their own. That's very different from asking the medical establishment to help them do it. That's not what the medical establishment is all about. People can make decisions for themselves, and hopefully they can act upon it themselves. But asking the medical establishment to, as you said, to predict, like Paul's friend, it's asking the medical establishment to sort of act like a god in making a determination that this is going to be the course of your illness. We don't know. We just don't know. And to ask us to let us put doctors in the position of deciding when somebody is going to die is just cuts against everything that the medical establishment is supposed to be about.
So, I mean, I imagine there are doctors who are for this, but I would also imagine there are way more doctors against this because of the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, right? And this sounds like all kinds of harm, but I understand the what people imagine this to be a humane thing to do if someone is suffering. Like, we can all understand if somebody is suffering and they just want the suffering to stop.
Well, it's also a fallacy to think that all deaths by medically assisted suicide are these wonderful, calm, peaceful, serene deaths. There have been lots of cases where it hasn't worked the way it's supposed to work, and people end up dying an excruciating death. Again, that gets back to why the concept of palliative care is so important. And we would be being dishonest in our position if we didn't say people need to have the ability to end their pain by methods short of killing themselves. And so palliative care and improved palliative care is a huge part of what we talk about when we talk about not wanting to have Connecticut join the other states that have medically assisted suicide in their statutes.
Hmm. I mean, it's an interesting juxtaposition that we are a state that got rid of the death penalty, and now we want to.
Kill people.
And I think I have to have more conversations with some of my friends who are behind this legislation to sort of hear what they have to say about it. Because I just feel like maybe I'm missing something that's germane to this conversation. But from where I sit, I kind of like the notion of palliative care before I like the idea of assisted living. I mean, a medically supervised suicide. And that's only because I just had this conversation with you, because now I feel very, very different.
Well, good. I'm glad. I'm
Like, it
glad
just
that
freaked
we
me
had
out. I
this
feel very, very
conversation.
different because
Um,
it didn't occur to me. So do you think that, um, when that case that you said about the kid that had leukemia but was in foster care, I found the foster care piece more compelling, uh, because had he been a kid in a family, I don't think anybody would have suggested not treating him.
that's probably true. Yeah, I mean that's certainly possibly true. So it gets only not just to people with disabilities, but for families who don't have sufficient funds, or for the poor community.
Oh boy.
That's right. If you think about what doctors are going to do with their
Oh,
Medicaid patients.
and the indigent and
Um,
the folks who might not have people concerned about where they are and if they're sick
sure.
and I mean, am I way off base into thinking that that's the road we could go down? Like,
Not at all. You're not
okay.
way. I told you about the story in Canada where this homeless person was offered medically assisted suicide. He was not offered housing. He was offered medically assisted suicide.
Mm. Okay. 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 So do you find that once people get some sense of what this really means, that they can make a better decision about whether or not they think this is legislation that ought to have that should be a part of Connecticut's story?
It's a very emotional issue. And I don't dispute that there are people who have watched loved ones have painful deaths. So it's a very emotional, very emotional. But I think from what Senator Staffson said recently, that he doesn't see that the Judiciary Committee, which apparently has not changed over the last election, that they are going to really change their mind on this. They've heard the stories, they understand what the issues are, and year after year after year, the bill doesn't make it out of committee. And that's because they seem to understand that there is too much at risk, that people's lives are at risk. And that's the first responsibility that we all have, is not to put people's lives at risk.
Hmm. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I certainly want you to come back and talk more about this, because I think it warrants more conversation. Like I think it warrants not just anecdotal, but I think it warrants people having a real conscious seeking component to this, because I I I I I have a fear that once you introduce a bill with all the caveats of doors opening further down the road, I don't know if you could stop it at some, at some point it becomes a
Mhm.
runaway train. Like
Yeah,
we say yes to all manner of things. And
yeah.
I don't think we want the Canadian, you know, model. I don't, because I can
And
see all
that,
kinds of
right,
problems.
right. And the Canadian model did not start out where it is now,
Hmm.
but every year it gets more and more expansive.
Hmm. Thank you so much, Attorney Alisberg, for your Alisberg for your time this morning. This has been a very illuminating conversation, to say the least. I've appreciated it greatly.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to speak about it. It's an important issue, and it's important because I've seen the people who it affects. And I speak from a place of great passion.
And you weren't always against this,
And I
right?
was not
So
always against it. That's
yeah,
right.
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for your time, and I look forward to further discussions on this, because this is critical, I think. And if
Thank you
it's
so much.
thank you, and thank you folks for coordinating this conversation. I appreciate them
I
greatly.
will.
All right. Take good
All
care.
right.
All
You
right.
too.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, Harry Droz. This was a Friday conversation for the books. And I'll be back on one of these days, Tuesday. I think I'm back on Tuesday because I'm not here on Monday because I gotta go see my doctor. And you can best believe I won't be having a conversation about assisted medical suicide. Harry, I just could not believe that whole Canada thing. When you said it, I just thought you was just being arbitrary, like you was just like interpreting it wrong. But that's a little scary to me, Harry, that
Like she said, they're trying to expand it to minors now. under the term mature minors. So mature minors will be able to make the decision because of a mental health issue.
So we would rather people so are we not in the business of treating stuff now? Like we just like, all right, well, you know what? You got a toothache, go ahead and kill yourself. And I don't mean to be that flippant, right? But it just seems like not a lot of thought is going into this.
Well, you have to remember, I mean, this is also, I mean, medical care is expensive.
Well, that's
So they prefer to cut your bill off early so that they're not paying for the rest of your life. Right?
oh man, Harry, we have to go because I can't with any more of this. I can't walk into my weekend with this on my brain because it makes me lose faith in humanity when I hear this profit over, over human life, right? And I'm not suggesting that. I don't know what I'm suggesting here. I just
It's not about profit because this is a single payer system, right? So
just don't want to pay.
right, it's just they just don't want to pay. It's
Just don't want to pay.
over the life of a person that they feel is gonna be suffering.
Yeah, like you're gonna die anyway. Like this is probably gonna kill you anyway, so you might as well just cut to the chase.
Yeah.
Save us 10 years or 15 years or whatever, or 5 years or a day or whatever it is.
Yeah. So
okay. All right, Harry. This was a lot. All right.
All right. So today we brought you end of the world stuff and then assisted suicide. So this the LoveBabz has been brought to you by the letter D. Death.
Oh my God.
Right.
Yes, we've had a lot of talking today. This was a lot. This is a lot to think about. Really a lot. So, well, anyway, have a good weekend and I'll see you back. I'm not here on Monday, so I'll see you back here on Tuesday.
All right.
I gotta go see my doctor. So have a good one.
Listening to LoveBabz Love Talk on WNHH LP 103.5 FM.